everybody. Randy Patterson here with Boomerosity. If you're a baby boomer, you no doubt know and remember and still love the songs by Firefall, like Strange Way to Tell Me You Love Me, You Are the Woman. You know the songs. They are part of the soundtrack of our youth and our early adult years. And boy, what a great band they were and still are. They're still existing. The remaining original band member is Jock Bartley. If you remember, probably a little over 2.5 years ago, or around 2.5 years ago, I interviewed Mark Andis, one of the singers in the band. And now I just interviewed Jock Bartley. And this interview was done in July of 2023. And it was about an album that's coming out now. So it's in September of 2023. So it's a little ahead of its time, but we had a wonderful talk. He gave me an impromptu rundown about the formation of the band, which was fascinating, and learned that there were people tied to all this that have been interviewed by Boomerosity, people like Chris Hillman, among others. So it was a fascinating chat just for that bit of content alone. But to talk about this new album where they cover songs by people they were tied to, because they toured with Fleetwood Mac and the Byrds and on and on and on. And so there were these songs on this new album that Firefall is covering by their friends and other bands. And so it's fascinating. You'll want to hear it. You want to own it for your own library. But more importantly, for me, is that you'll want to hear this interview. So please listen to it, like it, subscribe to this channel, and share it with your friends and ask them to do the same. So without any further ado, here is my first interview with Jock Bartley of Firefall. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson. Take care. Thanks so much, first of all, for taking the time and having the patience to join me. and also I want to thank you for all the years of great music, man. I don't get to tell everybody that when I meet them, but I wanted to thank you just for great music all these years and being a key part of the soundtrack of my youth and my early adulthood.
Yeah.
Today. So wonderful.
Well, you're welcome. And, you know, I know how lucky and fortunate I am. Now, I spent a long time as a youngster getting good on guitar, and I was probably destined to do this. But when I met Rick Roberts, you know, it was like, oh boy, you know, and Rick and I started playing. When I played with Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris and the Fallen Angels, Rick Roberts, who replaced Graham in the Burrito Brothers, came to our show in New York City. Now, Rick Roberts, not too many people know, basically discovered Emmylou Harris. And he called Chris Hillman, you know, in Washington, D.C. at a hotel and said, Chris, you got to get down here. You got to see this gal. And Chris said, I'm in bed. Leave me alone. He says, no, you need to come down here. And so Chris got dressed and came down, and you know, they heard and saw Emmylou and went, oh, and Chris within a few days called Graham Parsons, his buddy out in LA, and said, I think we may have found the gal you've been looking for. I totally fell into the Graham Parsons, Emmylou Harris Fallen Angels band by total coincidence and chance and good fortune. And when we got to New York City, Rick Roberts came, and he and I said, you live in Boulder? I live in Boulder. Hey, we should get together. And I thought I was going to be one of his guitar players on his third solo record that he was making. And then Mark Andys from Spirit and JoJo Gunn, who lived in Boulder, started practicing with us and learning Rick's songs. And suddenly it felt like a band and not a Rick Roberts solo project. And Rick said to us, I know a guy in Washington, D.C., Larry Burnett. He sings great. He writes great songs. And he and I blend really good together vocally. Do you want to hear a song of his? And Mark and I went, yeah. And Rick played us a reel-to-reel tape. This was long before cassette tapes.
Yep.
He played us, the first song we heard was Cinderella. And Mark and I just went, oh my, get him out here. And the end to this story is when Larry came out and we started rehearsing a band. We didn't have a band name yet. We didn't have any gigs. We were just seeing how it worked. We had 25 original songs of Rick and Larry's to work out.
Wow.
And what was amazing about that was a lot of those songs in that first week or two of practice, Mexico, Livin' Ain't Livin', Cinderella, Sad Old Love Song, all these songs ended up being on our first album a year and a half later.
Wow.
But, that's the thing about Firefall that has always been the greatest thing, and that's the songs.
Yeah.
Not the guitar player, not the bass player, not the drummer, not even the singers, but the songs.
Yeah.
And we had so many great songs written by Rick and Larry that it was just fantastic. And our first album, it's surprising to say, our first album on Atlantic Records went gold faster than any other album to date that Atlantic had put out, which is still so totally surprising to me because they had Led Zeppelin, Aretha Franklin, their Young Rascals and the Rascals. I'm missing somebody big. Anyway, they had all these, the Rolling Stones. They,
yeah, there you go. Yep.
They had the friggin' Rolling Stones. And we heard that our album went gold quicker than anybody else's album on Atlantic. And
wow.
Suddenly in 1976, we were touring with, we went out on tour as a brand new band that was starting to get some airplay in 1976 with the Doobie Brothers, Fleetwood Mac and the White Album, the Beach Boys, Leonard Skinner, Marshall Tucker. It was just such great timing.
Wow. What I find fascinating about you guys is you dropped some pretty big names there. One or two I've interviewed, Mark and Chris Hillman, and now you, but then, I've
Michael Clark, the drummer from the Byrds.
Yeah. So, all these names, all these, legends of music, of contemporary, our music from our day, and you guys were all part, you guys just knew each other and worked together. And there was just this camaraderie that fostered more greatness. And that's what I find fascinating about you guys.
In Boulder, Colorado, where I lived, I grew up in the Colorado Springs area and went up to CU as a college student for 1 year until I dropped out and said, I'm going to play guitar full time. And, Rick Roberts came into Boulder. Mark Andes came into Boulder. Boulder, there was a couple of years there where Stephen Stills, Chris Hillman, Dan Fogelberg, Carl Wilson from the Beach Boys, all these famous people from Los Angeles who got sick of living in Los Angeles moved to the mountains above Boulder. And all of a sudden, being a Boulder guy myself, when Firefall first started and we were just perfecting our sound and our songs, we'd play at a place called the Good Earth, and Stephen Stills would walk in and, hey, you want to come sit in? Or Diane Fogelberg and Joe Walsh. It was like Boulder was really it for about 4 or 5 years, and Firefall was part of that.
Wow. Well, now, what a great segue here. Now you guys are putting out this album. We're talking here in July. The album comes out in a couple months in September. And just looking at all the songs you're covering by your friends, and you've named the album beautifully, friends and family. Tell me the background on some of this. What fostered it? What drove you guys to put this together? And how long it took, all that kind of stuff.
About a year ago, our manager, Lynn Fico, who happens to also be our record company, Sunset Boulevard Records, he called, and Mark Andes was still in the band yet, back then. Mark not recently, about a year ago, got really tired of going out on the road, as happens with older people like us. And he just retired right before this album was going to be made. And a lot of this album was really about him, with all the bands that he had played with. But Lynn Fico said to me on a phone call, so, the original Firefall guys, some of the original Firefall were in a lot of other famous bands, like the Byrds and the Flying Breeder Brothers and Spirit and Heart and Dan Fogelberg's band, and in my case, Graham Parsons. Why don't you guys make an album of just their songs? And the light bulb went off when I heard that. That's a great idea in itself. But I said, that's great, but let's expand it a little bit. And in 1976, after our first album hit, we, like I just said, we got to tour with the Doobie Brothers or Fleetwood Mac or Lynyrd Skynyrd or Marshall Tucker or the Beach Boys, and I said, let's include those bands and have our pick of some of the best songs of the 1970s. What a great concept, and particularly since a lot of those bands, some of the Firefall members like Mark or Rick or Michael Clark or me played with some of those bands, but we got to be really good friends with the Doobie Brothers and Heart. We toured with Heart all the time. And even Lynyrd Skynyrd, we got to know Lynyrd Skynyrd pretty good, and we toured with them and then left that tour and went and did something else, and a week later heard about the plane crash, and it was like so tragic. But so when it became an idea, and me as leader of the band and what ended up being the producer of this record, I knew that it was really important, and also we had to be really careful which songs we picked, right? And when Lynn heard that we used to tour with the band, Levon Hillman, Robbie Robertson, and Rick Danko, he said, oh, that's great. You can do Up on Cripple Creek. And I went, no friggin' way. I said, Levon Helm is the only guy that should really ever sing Up on Cripple Creek. He said, oh, okay. And for me, I knew that I had no idea what Heart song to do. Now, Mark Andes played with Heart, and we used to tour with Heart all the time back in the 70s. And our new singer, bass player, who replaced Mark after he retired, whose name is John Bisaha, and is still in the band The Babies. He didn't replace John Hyatt, but a few years after, he's been in The Babies for like 12 years or something, and they don't work that often, and they don't make albums very often. And John said, I can do both. And we said, bingo. And John is such an amazing singer. He is fantastic. And he's an LA rock star kind of, and we've had some really good singers in Firefall. Rick Robertson, Larry Burnett, who wrote all of our early songs, they were great singers singing their songs. But John is like this, he's like this. Oh, it's amazing having him in the band. And I said, I don't know what Heart song to do. He said, and he kind of thought a minute, and he said, I could sing the crap out of What About Love. And I went, really? He says, oh, yeah. We'll put it down in key, and I said, okay, What About Love it is. And he actually said that to me. I didn't know which Doobie Brothers song to do either. Now, it occurred to me early on that there might be thousands of Doobie Brothers fans who get pissed off that Firefall would have the audacity to do this song, But I thought, so the whole album, as the liner notes say, it is Firefall who knows and used to play with some of these people and got to know and be friends with them. We are honoring that band, the bands. We are incredibly respectful in our recording of their songs, thinking about all the Doobie Brothers fans, and we better hit it out of the park when we do Long Train Running,
Yeah.
And, we were really careful with the picking of the songs. And I've got such great singers in Firefall now with Steve Weinmeister, who was in the band for 25 years and then left for a few years and came back. And now John Bisaha, and I'm the third singer in the blend. I knew we had no problem singing darn near anything, but we still had to be real careful.
Right.
And that whole band story about, yeah, up on Cripple Creek. I knew that's like the one song that we couldn't do. And the same thing with like on the Doobie Brothers, you couldn't do Listen to the Music. I mean, no. I mean, nobody should cover that. And there were times, like for instance, I thought, what Dan Fogelberg song should we do?
Mm-hmm.
And Dan Fogelberg hasn't had a lot of people cover his songs, and Dan, rest his soul, man, he was great. And he lived in Boulder, and we all got to be friends with him. And Mark Andes toured with him for many, many years. And I started listening to 4 or 5 Dan Fogelberg songs, and Part of the Plan just sounded like Firefall could do the heck out of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so when we started recording the songs, it was so much fun for me as a producer, because I mean, that's like, 15 years ago, Steve Weinmeister and I made a Beatles tribute album. And talk about, you better record your Beatles songs really good.
Mm-hmm.
And of course nobody could beat the original from a Beatles song. And there were a couple of songs where we did them totally different, so I really tried to think, okay, what are we going to do with this song? And most of the songs we kept really true to the original, because even if with a new band and with a Firefall sound and with a different singer than any of these other songs by Leonard Skinner or Marshall Tucker or Dan Fogelberg, it wasn't going to sound exactly like the original anyway.
Right.
But it was really great digging in and recording these songs. And I have to say, as a lead guitar player, and I've been a really good lead guitar player for a long time, from back in the 70s, and really right-brained. I don't really think about what I'm playing other than just play it,
Right.
And you can hear that on our early albums, like on Mexico, that's just me playing. That was a one-take deal that I didn't know at the time, but in Miami at Criteria Studios, my hero, Eric Clapton, was in the studio watching me play Mexico.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to do a section of that song over again. And the producer says, no, come on in. And it's the horn section in the middle of my solo. Da, 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 da. I had never played with the horns before. Anyway, he wouldn't let me do it over again. He said, come on in. So I walk in the control room, and the first person I see is my hero, Eric Clapton. And it was just unbelievable. And it's a good thing I didn't know that he was there, because I wouldn't have been able to play anything if I would have known that my hero's in the booth watching.
Been intimidating.
It was totally amazing. But as a lead guitar player, like when we did Can't You See by Marshall Tucker, I got to know Toy Caldwell pretty well back when we were touring with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was distinctive and great. And I wanted on my solos to honor Toy Caldwell on the Marshall Tucker song, or Leonard Skinner. They had 3 kick-ass guitar players. I didn't want to just kind of play, hey, this is Jock playing Leonard Skinner. I really wanted to honor the guitar parts. And like, for instance, on Part of the Plan on the Fogelberg song, I played that exactly as Dan did. I mean, people probably wanted to hear that solo again. I mean, So it was a very respectful and honoring type of process for Firefall to record these songs, and the album turned out great. I am just so pleased with it.
I think.
Have you heard more songs than just Simple Man?
Oh yeah, I've heard the whole.
Oh, good.
So I mean,
you heard the whole thing.
Yeah, it's amazing what you guys did. What I like about covers. I've heard some good covers of other people's music, some Hendrix stuff, some Beatles stuff. And, it's pretty cool when they do something different, but sometimes they go crazy with it. I love what you guys did, because the song's still recognizable, but it's fresh. It almost sounds like a brand new song. And that's, to me, the mark of excellent musicianship and creativity, is that you guys did that.
Why, thanks. I appreciate that.
But so while doing all this and putting this album together, were there any surprises that is like, wow, we didn't anticipate this, or, this came up, or how something turned out? Any kind of surprises in the making of the album?
You know, I can't think of one offhand because, for instance, when we were going to do Simple Man by Leonard Skinner, you know, I kind of listened to their version once and then kind of went, okay, let's take it from here. And there were no real surprises, you know, that we encountered, other than, I mean, when I was, you know, recording vocals and I'm telling John or Steve out, you know, singing, you know, let's change that harmony part a little bit. It doesn't sound right. So, you know, making records is so much fun because you just react in the moment, you know, and if the harmony part that you think is supposed to be right doesn't sound right when you listen back to it, you got to change it a little bit, you know, or do something. So honestly, I don't think we had a lot of surprises on that. And this darn album took, you know, over a period of 8 or 9 months to finish, you know, so I was working on it for, you know, darn near a year, but it was really great. And hey, let me just say before it goes too much further, your backdrop, which is the Firefall Friends and Family album cover, my son Jamie did that. Jamie Crow Bartley.
Oh, very cool.
He did that, and you know, and I'm a painter, and I have an art career going, and sell prints and stuff. And Lynn said, "I love your paintings, Jock. Why don't you do the album cover?" And I went, "Yeah, I don't know. Me painting whatever it was going to be," and my son was doing. He designed that logo, you know, and I just said, "Hey, Jamie, why don't you see what you come up with?" And like 2 days later, he gave us that.
Wow.
And I mean, the cover is spectacular.
It is. I love it. Very cool. Very, very cool. Well, that, as far as putting this album together, and you've worked on a lot of records, you know, Firefall and others, what was the biggest change in the process for this one compared to any of the others you've worked on?
Well, what's interesting is, and not a lot of people know, that nowadays a lot of records get made over the internet, you know, and we'll cut guitars and a bass to the click track and send it up to our drummer in Oregon. And he goes in the studio and plays with it and sends it back to me. Or like on the Heart song, What About Love? Both myself and John Bisahar are really good friends with Howard Leese, one of the lead guitar players of Heart. And Howard's been with Bad Company for the last, you know, 5 or 8 years or something. You know, I said, man, we should get Howard to play in this song. And in fact, he's so good and did such an amazing lead guitar solo on the Heart original song from the 80s that Mark Andes was on too. I asked him, you want to play the solo? He said, sure. And he said, well, you know, you changed the chords on the solo a little bit, so I don't think I can, this is Howard talking, I don't think I can play the exact solo that I did on the Heart version. I said, I don't want you to. This is a new version. Just play whatever you feel like. And, you know, and same thing, you know, on when we did the Feel a Whole Lot Better by the Byrds, the Gene Clark song from their first album. And I mean, the Byrds were the American Beatles, you know? And I had John Jorgensen play 12-string on it because he's such an amazing world-class player, you know, and it's like, it's really great including other people that you know that are great players to participate in your recordings. It was really fun.
Cool. Well, you know, for something like this, I would imagine, I mean, I asked this of artists, whether they've written the songs or using someone else's work. You know, you can't ask what's your favorite on an album because, like I always say, it's like picking your favorite kid, right? Even if you're covering someone else's work. But which song from this album? And I tried to, you know, before I ask you this, I have to say I tried figuring out what I would point to.
I'm interested to hear.
As a calling card, basically. And you know what? I had a hard time, Jock. I mean, I'm looking at the list here and I don't know, you know, I got a line because I'm kind of a Spirit song. And I'm going to be talking to Al Staley in a week or two for the second time. And he was with he was with Spirit back in the day, or, and I'm
not in the original band, but
no, but
later
I mean,
with Randy California.
Right. And I've talked to Fuzzy Knight too before, but I don't know,
So I Got a Line on You is one of your favorites.
Yep, absolutely. And
what else? What's number 2 or another number 1 kind of?
Well, probably these are ties for number 1. It would also have to be Simple Man and Can't You See, because I'm huge fans of both of those bands. And so, and for me to say those are among my favorites indicates that I feel, for whatever it's worth, that you guys did it great. So, sometimes you can listen to I'll go listen to local cover bands here, and it's kind of like, yeah, okay, don't quit your day job, that type of thing. But you guys did phenomenal on those songs.
I've been told that, and I was a little bit worried about this one. I've been told by people who've heard the whole album, which is a limited number of people without the album being out yet.
Right.
That the Poco song In the Heart of the Night, is by far my favorite song on the record. And the truth is when we decided to do Heart of the Night, Firefall doesn't have a pedal steel player in the band. And I knew, Rusty Young, who was really good friends of all of us, and we toured with Poco for 20, 25 years, Rusty Young and Paul Cotton. Mm-hmm. And, I just decided, okay, I'm going to have my slide guitar at least emulate kind of some pedal steel guitar stuff. And I really like our version of The Heart of the Night, but I was surprised when 2 or 3 people said that's by far the standout of the record. And I went, and that's the cool thing about it, is each person's going to have a favorite or two, mm-hmm. which is why making a 13-song album, every damn song better be good.
That's right.
We can't have any filler here.
That's right.
But the truth is the songs, these are 13 of the best songs from the late 60s and 70s, mm-hmm. And I have a scoop for you.
What's that?
Tomorrow, Thursday, I'm starting cutting tracks for Friends and Family 2, and we're doing a second album of this concept. And I'm cutting 2 songs tomorrow with guitars and a click track, and just starting to build up the process. And it's just so much fun, because here I get to play on some, for me to play on a Lynyrd Skynyrd song is amazing,
Yep.
And I really like my guitar solo on Simple Man. And like I said, when I was playing it, I was just playing, but I was thinking in the back of my mind, all those great kick-ass guitar players in Skynyrd.
Yep. Well, and gosh, so I'm glad that you stole my thunder on this with that. I'm glad you're telling me, but that was going to be one of my next questions, was what's next on there. So I'm glad to hear there's a follow-up to this, and I would imagine.
Yeah, and I've already told Lynn. I've already told Lynn, I want to include 2 or 3 new Firefall songs too. So we'll just have a little section, because, I don't even know how many records Firefall has made, frankly, 8 or 9 or whatever. And there's like 4 or 5 different greatest hits out, that Atlantic or Rhino has kept putting the same 10 songs on a different greatest hits or a best of, So, it just really, we've always had really good songs when they were all Firefall songs. Mm-hmm. Some songs better than other ones, but in this case, to pick, what song by Heart or what song by the Doobie Brothers do you want to pick? And when you look at the Doobie Brothers' main 10 songs, there's some amazing, great material there. Mm-hmm. And, I'm friends with, Patrick and most of the Doobies. And when we used to tour with them, it was the Michael McDonald Skunk Baxter version and not the original one.
Right.
So I didn't know, well, should we do a Michael McDonald Taking It to the Street or, kind of song? But now, it's great. We're just picking the songs for this next record, and we're 3 songs in, and it'll probably be 12 or 13 or 14 again.
Very
and it's
cool.
I just have to say, I'm so honored and fortunate to be in a position to be able to do this,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I've earned it, when I think about when I was 9 years old till about, 18, about the only thing I did was play a guitar all the time, just getting really good at it. And I was trained by a world famous jazz guitar player in Colorado, a guy named Johnny Smith, who used to play with Bing Crosby and Doc Severinsen and Stan Getz, and had like 15 albums out on Verve or the Blue Note label. And for me to, as an 8.5-year-old kid, fallen in with a master jazz guitar player, and I took lessons from him, until, about 3 months after the Beatles hit in 1964,
Wow.
because, after I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan as a 13-year-old kid, I went, I don't want to play jazz. A lot of that jazz stuff he was teaching me, really deep jazz. Hey, I went, I want to be in a rock band, and the interesting thing was that a lot of my friends, when I was in 8th grade or 9th grade or something, after the Beatles came out, they all wanted to learn how to play guitar and be in a band. And I already had like 5 or 6 years of playing, so I could already play good, and I got in my first band with a bunch of seniors, and I was a freshman in high school, and I've been taking solos in bands since. And, it's funny. One thing about being a soloist, specifically for me, a guitar soloist, but a keyboard soloist or a sax player or whatever, is taste. And playing tastefully is not really what you play, it's what you don't play.
Exactly.
And that's kind of the Miles Davis thing. About Miles Davis could make one note just go, people drop their jaw. It's so great, and you don't need to like a lot of guitar players do. And I've always kind of given myself up as a guitar player to play the best thing that I could play for that song, because it's about the song. It's not about showing off as a player or, hey, do you like this lick? That's not it at all. It's like, and, a lot of my best solos were really kind of a non-thought, just play, and Mexico's a good example of that. When we recorded You Are the Woman, Firefall's biggest hit, I'd never played a solo on this guitar solo part anymore. And it took me a few times through to figure out where I wanted to start it. But when I played that solo, came out real quick. I just played it and it was done. And the producer said, that's great. So a lot of really good soloists aren't really left brain. They just right brain it and let it come.
Yep.
And I'm fortunate to kind of sometimes be in that bunch.
Cool. Well, what about a tour to support this? You going to go and hit the road?
Well, tours, when you say, are you going on tour? In the old days, in the 70s, when we were big stars and touring with everybody, we'd go on month or month and a half long tours. We're kind of weekend warriors now, and we'll have 2 gigs in Florida, or we'll have a gig in Seattle and 1 in Portland, or we'll have 3 gigs in Southern California, or we'll have 1 gig in St. Louis. So we just fly to gigs and play, but it's going to be nice because we're going to, I'm going to have to figure out which songs and how many to include from this record. Because, for instance, if we're playing a gig with REO Speedwagon or America or something where we get a 40-minute set, I mean, I've known for 25 years which 6 or 8 Firefall songs must be played.
Yep.
Cinderella, Mexico, You Are the Woman, Just Remember I Love You, Strange Way, Living Ain't Living. There's 6 right there, So we're not going to be able to play much of this record if we're opening for somebody bigger than us.
Right.
But if we're headlining and we have a hour and a half or 2-hour set, we're going to play 2 or 3 or 4 of these songs because they're so great. And, people, I think you're right about our versions of these songs on a song that you're really familiar with from 25 years ago really sounds fresh and new and is great, you know, and you know, we're not trying to compete with the original, but you know, our versions really are getting people off, and I'm just really proud of how great this record turned out.
So in addition to the follow-up to this record that you're starting on tomorrow, what else is on your radar for the next 8 or 12 months?
Well, I do want to do another Firefall record of 10 or 12 original songs, either written by us in the band or me, or, you know, and I'm not on an ego trip about that. And particularly now that songwriting and songwriters don't make any money anymore.
Okay.
You know, so the public is so used to streaming or paying 2 cents for a listen, or, you know, it's like in the old days, I mean, you know, Rick Roberts, you know, he would get huge checks every quarter for having written You Are the Woman and getting millions of airplays, you know, as the songwriter, you know, but nowadays, you know, it's all about the quality of the song. And unless you get in a movie or a TV soundtrack or a commercial, you're not going to make any money as a songwriter, you know. And I'm really looking forward to the next record after Friends and Family to and I've got 4 or 5 songs that I think could be really great that I wrote 6 years ago or 3 years ago or something. And you know, we scour Nashville and Los Angeles, and I know a lot of songwriters and performers out there, and I'll call somebody and say, hey, you got any songs that might be good for Firefall to do? And you know, so on my radar, other than being a weekend warrior and going and playing gigs and making a living and having the gigs, you know, make a living for the guys in the band, other than Friends and Family 2, I want to make another Firefall record. So it's pretty interesting because, you know, Firefall was big, but we were never really, really big. You know, we'd always play with Fleetwood Mac or the Doobie Brothers or people that were like big superstars. And I'll tell you what, when we'd play with Fleetwood Mac back in Rumors, you know, we'd go play our little 35-minute set in a stadium full of 60 or 70,000 people. You know, it's like, oh my God, you know. And the cool thing is that we had the songs and had the punch as a rock band to really, whether we played with an Ambrosia or a Little River Band or a 38 Special, you know, we could hold our own for our set.
Yep.
And, you know, I know how lucky I am, and thank you, Rick and Larry, and thank my lucky stars, you know, for being still in this position. And, you know, a lot of people forgot about Firefall. They know You Are the Woman, and because of You Are the Woman or Just Remember I Love You, they think, oh, that light rock band, Firefall, you know, but we're a rock band that has some ballads.
Yep. And ones that stick in the brain and in a good way. No. So
yeah.
And so with this, with Friends and Family 2, you're working on, and a new Firefall, hopefully. I know I'm hoping that you and I get to talk more in the future and do these kinds of interviews. So I might not
absolutely.
I may not ask you this the next time, but probably the time after. And it's not meant to be a macabre type of question, but it just kind of more reflective. And that's this. And I know you've been asked this in different ways over the years, but when you step off of the tour bus of life at the great gig in the sky to steal from Pink Floyd, how do you want to be remembered? What do you hope your legacy is overall?
I first of all have to say that I like you calling, well, I don't want to ask a macabre question. It's like, I don't know if I've ever been asked a macabre question before. As a lead guitar player, I've always prided myself about being tasteful, playing what the song needed, and being really fiery, even if you're only playing a note or two. And I hope to be remembered as a really tasty lead guitar player that played what the song needed, and whether it's a soft song or a hard rocking song. And so far so good, I guess. But all you got to do is go about your business and make the best record you can.
There you go. There you go. Well, you've made a lot of great ones, Jock. And
Thank you.
again, thank you for all the years of great music. I'm looking forward to more great music, and love the album. I can't wait to hear how sales do when it comes out in a couple months. And maybe somewhere down the road we get to meet in person and shake hands. It would be great.
You got it.
So,
You've been a great interviewer, and thanks. I'm glad we got the technical bugs worked out.
Yep.
And it's an honor to talk to you, and I appreciate your input about our new record, because I haven't heard any bad stuff about this record from anybody.
Mhm.
The people who mastered the record, or out in LA listening to it and everything. He says, man, these songs sound great.
Yeah.
And that was our job. And once you give it away to the public, it's like you just hope people like it.
You wait for that voting by way of playing in dollars, right? So
I guess so. Yeah.
yeah. Well, listen, Jock, I appreciate it. I'll let you know when this thing runs. I'll work with Wendy as far as timing, but we will be talking again in the future. And anytime you have anything new you want to plug, just let me know. We'll set one of these up. My door is always open to you, my friend.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it. It's been fun. You have a great rest of the week, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks for putting all those Firefall covers behind you.
Yeah,
I love seeing that cover.
I hope you didn't notice any of them missing. So
I don't see any missing. They're all there.
Okay. All right. Good deal. Good deal. So, all right, my friends, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You will. Thanks. Bye-bye.